Peru is home to the third of the three great Indian culture hearths that existed at about the time the Spanish arrived. That culture hearth was, of course, the Incan Empire. The Inca were around from about 1000 AD until 1533, at least as the Incan Empire as we know it. The center of the Incan Empire was Cusco, which you can see has multiple spellings. The spelling on the far right is the indigenous spelling of the word Cusco. The word Cusco in the Incan language, which is Quechua, means belly button, which is the way they saw the world. They were the center of the world, just like a belly button is the center of your body. That picture to the right is the very famous Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu was a resort of sorts for the Incan ruler. In fact, the word Inca is the word for ruler in Quechua. So we derive the name Incan Empire or Inca or the Incas from the ruler. Cusco is in the southern part of Peru, as you can see here. Another very important city, as we go along in this explanation of the Incan Empire, was Cajamarca, which you can see here with the red arrow. Unlike with the Aztecs, where their cities were destroyed, or the Maya, where the cities were abandoned, many of the cities the Inca inhabited are still intact. Cusco, for example, is still a very thriving metropolis at 12,000 feet up in the mountains. You can see here along this street, that is the original Incan architecture. And if you look down the street, you can see those rainbow flags are actually the Incan flag. Take a look here. You can see, if you look closely, the incredible craftsmanship that the Inca were able to employ to build these walls. They did this without any mortar or cement whatsoever. They fitted the rocks in using ancient tools and foisting them up and then sliding them together. This was the center of the Incan Empire, the Coricancha, which also has multiple spellings. Down here at the bottom, you can see the pre-Incan architecture. This is the Incan architecture. So what happened was there were indigenous people living there before the Inca. The Inca conquered them, destroyed their architecture, and then built the Incan architecture on top. And then when the Spanish came along, the Spanish turned around and did the same thing. It's an odd thing about human beings. We seem incapable of conquering someone and then not destroying their stuff. If you think relatively recently, when ISIS had conquered Mosul, they went into a Babylonian museum and gleefully destroyed ancient art and architecture and monuments with sledgehammers. The peak of Incan power was in the 1400s. So by the time the Spanish arrived, they were already beginning to wane at least a bit. The Inca managed to conquer much of the Andes during the 1400s when they expanded outwards from Cusco. Here you can see where the Incan Empire extended. It was from the northern part of Chile all the way up through southern Colombia. Here's Cusco, more or less. The Inca were masters of altitudinal zonation. They were able to grow potatoes and beans, American cotton, llama, alpaca, cuy, all of which they get credit for having domesticated. And in addition to that, they were able to acquire other crops from Mesoamerica and the Amazon. Because of that, they were able to maximize food production. The last independent Incan ruler was Atahualpa. When the Spanish arrived, Atahualpa had just completed a 7-year civil war. In other words, the Inca had just gone through a 7-year civil war. They were fighting with each other at the time the Spanish arrived. That was probably some luck for the Spanish. The civil wars fought between two brothers for dominancy. Atahualpa's brother was captured by Atahualpa's forces, and he was killed. When the Spanish arrived, Atahualpa and his military were at Cajamarca, that town I had just mentioned, which still exists. And Atahualpa had 80,000 soldiers with him. The Spaniard who gets credit for having conquered the Inca was Francisco Pizarro and around 180 Spanish conquistadors. Pizarro was a friend of Hernan Cortes. They came from the same part of Spain, which is the poorest part of Spain, the far western part of Spain, a place called Extremadura. It's on the border with Portugal. Pizarro had studied what Cortes did with the Aztecs and how he conquered the Aztecs, and he turned around and employed very similar methods with the Inca. Pizarro arranged to meet Atahualpa in the central square at Cajamarca, and Atahualpa agreed. Atahualpa showed up at the central square with his elite military force, probably 5,000 men, but he instructed them to come unarmed. And when they all arrived in the square, the Spanish cut the square off and killed every single one of them. And they captured Atahualpa, and the Spanish lost no men in that conflict. Then the Spanish went about and extorted the gold from the Inca and eventually killed Atahualpa. But because this was up in the Andes, and the Andes are a difficult landscape to live in, millions of people survived. Today, 17% of the population in Peru speaks Quechua, which is the indigenous language of the Inca, their native language, and about 3% of the population speaks Aymara. So that means 1/5 of the population speaks Indian languages as their first language. Because of this, Peru is a country that experiences cultural pluralism, where two separate cultures exist side by side but have nothing to do with each other.